Hey there, we are here with Assembly Member Amy Demboski running for re-election in the Chugiak Eagle River J-Bear area. Hello.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself for people who don't know.
Sure. Well, my husband Ben and I, we have two children, Kennedy and Riley. I grew up in Chugiak Eagle River. My husband did as well. I'm a 1994 graduate of Chugiak. My daughter Kennedy in 2014 graduated from Chugiak, and now she is a sophomore up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And our son Riley is a 10th grader at Chugiak High. So we've been, we're products of the community. I've been volunteering in the Chugiak Eagle River community since I was about 15. My background is primarily in the healthcare sector. I used to build and manage dental practices all over Alaska. So I've had the opportunity to build multi-million-dollar businesses right here in Alaska. And I went to UAA. I have 3 degrees. My first 2 were from UAA, in justice and 1 in history. And then I have an MBA with an emphasis in finance from Columbia Southern. So I have a unique skill set, I think, when it comes to building and managing businesses. And with that, a few years ago, I made the decision that I was going to get involved in public life. And I started volunteering on boards and commissions. Governor Parnell appointed me to the Judicial Conduct Commission for the state of Alaska many years ago, and not governor yet, Mayor Sullivan appointed me to the Parks and Rec Board of Supervisors in Chugiak Eagle River. I was also community council president and chair of the Municipal Budget Advisory Commission, all before I was on the Assembly. And now I'm running for re-election to the Assembly.
Okay, and so, just for the voters, why are you running again? Why are you running for re-election?
Well, I think especially what we've seen in the last year or so, there's been a dramatic shift on the Anchorage Assembly. The shift has been very liberal, frankly, when it comes to fiscal policies and others. And I think with the election of a more liberal-leaning mayor, I think it's important to have checks and balances. And I think we need a strong voice that can deliver. And I think the people of Chugiak Eagle River will look at my candidacy and say, she's proven. We know her record. She stands strong for our community's values. And I think that's the job of a representative. So I'm running for re-election because I truly believe we need a strong, proven conservative voice. And I think I'm that voice.
If voters choose you again on April 5th, what will be your top priority for this next term?
Well, I'm going to try to reel back some of the spending that this administration, this Assembly has done in the last 6 months. I think it's important for people to realize that in the first 6 months of this administration's endeavor, they busted the tax cap. The tax cap has been the way it had been for over 30 years, and they changed the calculation. And what that means directly to property taxpayers, it's an $11.4 million increase in property taxes in 2016. That's 4.3%, and that's only from the city's operating budget. That's huge. So all these bonds that we're going to talk about, they're all outside of the tax cap, and we're not talking about ASD's portion of the taxes either. So unfortunately, voters get their tax bill 2 weeks after the election, and I think it's really important that they understand just how significant of a tax increase they're about to have. And I think we need a strong voice that's able to work with people, but at the same time, call it like they see it. Whether you're right or left, to me, I'm going to vet every issue on its own merit. And I think it's really important that voters understand what's about to hit their pocketbooks come April.
Okay, we're going to come back to the tax cap. I want to start with the budget. How can you help the Muni going forward dealing with the budget issues we're facing?
So we have a lot of, that's a big question with a lot of detail wrapped into it. And I have to be very clear, when I was first elected, one of my very first budget amendments was to take $500,000 out of the Troubled Centennial Celebration budget. And that was, a mayor that I like and I agree with many, many times, but it was one of those issues that I felt it was inappropriate to use taxpayer money that way. And over the course of my tenure, I've introduced multiple different pieces of legislation to either improve public safety to bring down costs or direct rebates to taxpayers. So I've introduced many, many different opportunities to save taxpayers millions, and I've been successful at that. Moving forward, I think it's important that as these budgets come before us, there's no longer a continuation budget. We have to start back at the beginning. We have to scrub every department. It was attempted this last budget season as well, but with a shift in dynamic on the Assembly and in the administration, there was absolute down partisan lines. They refused to take any sort of cuts, any sort of savings, and instead the mission was, let's instead change the tax cap and tax as much as we can. So I think it's important that we have those conversations, but we have to have people who know what they're looking at and who understand where to look. And I think my experience on the Budget Advisory Commission, prior to my experience on the Assembly, it just gives me a great basis for that. And I'm able to watch out for the taxpayers' wallets because unfortunately, there's a majority that's not.
Now, continuing kind of down that line, when it's a tough decision, but where should we be making those cuts? What needs to go?
Well, there's a lot. Like I said, I offered nearly $7 million in cuts. So, for example, let me just give you one example. Whether it's the library or whether it's a company training for fire officers, in this last budget, this administration increased the travel budget. In a time when we are looking at, on a state level, serious fiscal decline, and we're increasing travel budgets, it's not responsible, and it's not necessary, frankly. We need to look at combined maintenance between ASD and the municipality of Anchorage. We need to look at shared services, and we also need to look at privatization. There's things that we can do to privatize functions that government does now that we don't need to be doing. For example, plan review or inspections, those types of things. I would never advocate that for public safety. Public safety is one of the essential functions government should do, and we should do it well, but we need to make sure we have a strong fiscal foundation. And that means some of the extra stuff that government's doing right now that shouldn't be doing, that the private sector can do cheaper, that's where we need to go.
And then when we look at taxes right now, property owners are bearing the full weight of taxes. Do you support diversifying that possibly with a sales tax or seasonal tax?
Well, I want to be very clear. There's certain requirements in order to institute any new tax. First thing being 60% of the voters have to vote for it. The other thing is I think it has to be under the tax cap. And if we institute any sort of sales tax, it should directly dollar for dollar offset property taxes. But with that said, I am not advocating for any new taxes until I think the government's already spending your money well. And I don't think we're there. And I think when you have multiple members of the Assembly that offer 48 amendments in order to bring down the budget, every single one of them being rejected without very little to any discussion, it tells you that partisan politics in Anchorage is alive and well this day and age, and it's unfortunate. We don't need to act like Juneau. We need to sit there and serve the people of the community, which means we have to be able to check that at the door and do what's right for the community. And so, with that said, I think until such time that I believe politicians are spending your money well, I'm not going to advocate for them taking more of it.
Now, we've touched on the tax cap. You clearly do not support the change in the way we calculate the tax cap. Some of the other candidates have said it doesn't really matter either way. We're not going to see much of a difference. How do you feel about that?
That's just a lie. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if anybody cares about how much they're spending in taxes and they want to spend less, they should vote yes on 8. And the reason being is, if you just look at the time over the Mayor Sullivan's administration, just over that period, if this change is allowed to stay, the change that the Anchorage Assembly made, if it's allowed to stay, it means they could have taxed $51 million annually extra to property tax owners. That's huge. And I have yet to see some politicians that don't look at the tax cap as a goal. And instead of being a constriction, something that is supposed to keep them contained, many of them look at it as how much more can we spend? And I think that's an awful thing, actually. So I don't think it's true. I think that's a complete false statement, trying to lure people into allowing the change to stay. And I think there's a reason the voters of the municipality instituted the tax cap back in the 70s. And I think if politicians want it to change, they should go back to the voters, and the voters should be the ones to allow it to change, not the politicians.
Moving on to public safety, how can we, in this next term, make Anchorage a safer place to live?
Well, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of talk about community policing. And the fact of the matter is, to go into a full community policing model, you would virtually need to double the force. We can't afford that. We're frankly not that big of a community to be able to do that. But what we can do is we can deploy our resources better. So that means more intensive, I like the CAP team. It's a community action policing team. It's an intense, you know what it is, I'm sure. It's an intense team of officers that deal with specific problems. And they've been very, very effective, specifically dealing with homeless issues and the spice issue. And I think investments in those types of teams, whether it's them, the theft unit, the gang unit, rapid deployment with specific focus, I think is where we need to go. I think it's a smarter way to use your resources. We've seen it in education. Throwing more money at something doesn't make it better. It just makes it bigger. So I don't think bigger is always better, but I think a better utilization of the resources, which means a focus, is the way to go.
Okay, and then you mentioned Anchorage's homeless issue. The mayor's been pushing housing first. How do you think the Muni can or should be dealing with Anchorage's homeless population?
Well, as I said, you know, the city, there's a couple things to this discussion, and I think it deserves something much longer than 60 seconds, unfortunately. But, you know, the fact of the matter is you can't just build houses for everyone because the property owners have to pay for it, and we only have a finite number of people who pay taxes. So what we have to look at is delivery of services. We have to look at continuation of care. You know, you can't put somebody in detox and expect they're going to be drug-free in a week. There has to be a continuation of care. So we understand that. So we have to, and we have started getting together with the community partners that provide services, whether it's rehabilitative care, detox, treatment, those types of things, housing, job training. We've started pairing them together. So hopefully we can have that continuation of care. But the other thing we have to do is we have to reach out to other groups that have mechanisms and ability to get involved in this topic. You know, a year ago or so, I sat down with a tribal elder from one of the Matsu Valley tribes, actually, and he had said to me, you know, Amy, we want to help with this problem, but we've been knocking at the door for so long, nobody answers, we just stop knocking. And I think that's a testament to the fact that there are community partners that want to be involved but haven't been asked, and that's a miss on our part. So I think, you know, we need to reach out to whether it's tribes, whether it's civic groups, whether it's chambers of commerce. We need to reach out to everyone, and because this is a community issue.
And then another housing issue, there is a shortage of housing in Anchorage and our population's projected to grow. How do we deal with that? How do we prepare for that?
Well, there's many factors for this, right? Availability of land. So any land that's held by the municipality or the state, we need to look at it and say, is this land that would be adequate for housing? And we should divest it and make it available to the private sector. That's one big component. But the other big component, frankly, is our land use and zoning codes and our bureaucratic process within the city. You know, there's a lot of people that I've spoken to over the last couple of years that have said, listen, I was either going to buy in Anchorage or build in Anchorage, and they did it in the Valley instead. Why? Because it's easier to build. They still have building codes that are safe, but at the same time, they don't have the bureaucratic nightmare of dealing with the Anchorage Building Department, you know, the permitting and planning department. So I think, you know, we have to recognize that there are building codes to keep us safe. Yes, that's fine. But when we get so bureaucratic, we worry about all the red tape rather than delivering a product or a service or helping the private sector deliver that service. I think we've missed the mark. So we have to deal with challenges in Title 21, there's no question. Title 21 being the land use and zoning codes. The new version of it has gone live January 1 of this year, and we found there's problems with it. There's places in the code where it conflicts itself. There's places in the code that are unclear, that even the department doesn't understand. And there's things that new rules that have been instituted that frankly just don't work. And so those are things that I've been working. I've introduced ordinances to try to correct it. And we're trying to be responsive, so.
And then this summer, we will possibly see a brand new industry open its doors here in Anchorage. How should the Muni be regulating commercial marijuana, and how do you think it's doing so far?
Well, I'll tell you how we are doing it. So I was on the marijuana committee for the assembly, and I was at the helm of helping draft and pass this legislation. Proposition 2 was approved by the voters, which legalized the commercial industry here in the state of Alaska. and Anchorage is moving forward. So we've passed zoning and land use laws. We've passed licensing laws. We've worked closely with the state and the state marijuana board. As a matter of fact, their chairman had a position on our committee. So we've really tried to vet it. We've sent people out of state to learn how they do it in Colorado and other places, and we've learned from a lot of their mistakes. From a Chugiak Eagle River perspective, it was really important for me to make sure that my community's voice was articulated, was heard, and those concerns were reflected in the zoning ordinance that was passed. And I was successful at every point. And I think that's because I was willing to go into the community, have town hall meetings where marijuana industry folks that are wanting to get into the industry were able to sit right there along community council members and have a discussion. And it was very productive. So I think ultimately we've done the best we could have done thus far. We haven't started accepting our first applications yet. Those will probably start coming in June, I'm thinking, July maybe. And we'll probably start to see the first grow operations probably in the fall. But with that said, it's important for us as elected officials to be responsive to the community concerns. Absolutely, that's first and foremost. And secondarily, we have to be fair to the industry. They have to understand what the rules are, and they have to be very clear from the beginning. And I think we've achieved that. There's no doubt there will be changes made to it. Again, those unforeseen things that we didn't quite anticipate will have to probably go back and be addressed as they come up. And we're all committed to doing that. But first and foremost, I want to make sure that my community feels like they have a voice in this process. And I think I've been successful at doing that.
And then quickly, the Anchorage School District wants to ask voters to approve bonds over the next 6 years, knowing that taxpayers with less money from the state will likely be paying for all of that. Is that something you support?
Well, it depends on what the projects are, frankly. You know, I'm not going to give the ASD a blanket, I'm going to support you no matter what, because frankly, you have to prove to me that it's worth taking taxpayer money for. So we'll see. You know, unfortunately, again, you know, Eric Croft's running for assembly, I know, but in this political arena, during this last bond project, one of the most severe projects that needs to get done is greening middle school's roof, and he took it out. It seemed apparently completely political, and it was unfortunate because, again, our community is suffering because some people want to play politics, and I think that's unfortunate. So when we see stuff like that, you can bet I'm not going to support that. I think we need to do our job regardless of political will. We need to do our job, and we need to represent our community. And unfortunately, and sometimes it means you got to stand up and you have to call it like you see it. And I'll do that every time.
And last question, how would you rate the mayor's performance so far? What grade would you give him? Because I know, you ran against him.
Yep.
What do you think?
Well, we both ran for the same office. And so I think, quite frankly, I would not give him a passing grade at this point. And let me tell you why. He has, in the first 6 months of office, he has absolutely busted the tax cap. He has raised property taxes $11.4 million. And that's just in his first 6 months. Frankly, I don't think we can afford that type of fiscal policy. When we have, again, and we talk about bonds, for 6 years at least, we had a policy where in debt service, we weren't going to bond for more than we're retiring. He's already busted that with his first bond. We're only retiring $36 million, and the bond is 50, right, at least. So you look at it and you say, okay, so we're digging further in debt. We're asking property taxpayers to pay more. You're refusing to take any sort of savings that have been offered to you because maybe somebody with an R behind their, political affiliation is offering them. I think it's unfortunate, and in the end, I think it's the taxpayers of the municipality that are losing. But it'll all work out just fine. We have a big community, and we have great voices from both sides, and I think we can find a way to work together. But I'm not going to give somebody a feel-good passing grade just because, quite frankly, you have to earn it. And at this point, unfortunately, Mayor Berkowitz is not making the grade.
All right. Well, Amy Demboski running for the Anchorage Assembly seat out of Chugiak and Eagle River. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.